I'll introduce the moderator. I think many of you know Jonathan English, the Board of Trade's Policy Director. He's responsible for transportation, infrastructure, and trade files at the board, and he understands there are many obstacles in our way to getting things built. But at the same time, he's also very energized by the potential on the waterfront that world-class transit would unleash, and he's a smart, insightful champion for improving the system here and across the region. Over to you, John.
Well, thanks, Tim, and thanks so much, Tim. And you know, it's always been a tremendous pleasure working with you, and I know you take extra special care of us now that we are actually officially waterfront tenants here down on Queens Quay. And you know, it's been a few months that we've been here, but we've really enjoyed this time, and we've really found that there's a real community that's being built down here. And one of the integral parts of that community is transportation. Now, we'll be seeing soon the poll results of how all you've gotten here, but really, you know, this is something that is absolutely relevant to me, because every day when I come here, I have to find a transportation solution, and I'm fortunate I can walk from Union. But there are a lot more things that we need to do to address the transportation challenges on the waterfront. As you just have to look out our window here and you can see the sheer number of buildings that are going up. The waterfront is full of cranes, and these are for office buildings, these are for new housing, these are for all kinds of new uses that we desperately need here in Toronto. The waterfront is one of the most important growth areas in the entire GTA, and we need to build the infrastructure so that it's in place as people arrive. So without further ado, I'm really, really excited to have this great panel here. So first, I just wanted to remind you that through our app, you can submit questions for these panelists. So first, on stage with me is Pina Mallozzi. She's Waterfront Toronto's Senior Vice President of Design. Pina's responsible for the planning and design of a large portfolio of projects, which includes the revitalization of Queens Quay, right in front of us, the Gardiner East Environmental Assessment, and other parks and public spaces emerging on the waterfront, as well as working on the Waterfront East LRT project, all towards the vision of a vibrant, well-designed community right here on the water. Welcome, Pina. Also with us is Anna Bailão. She's the head of affordable housing and public affairs at Dream Real Estate Investment Trust. Anna's an internationally recognized housing expert and a passionate city builder with over 20 years of private and public sector leadership experience. As Toronto's former deputy mayor and housing advocate, she was the first politician appointed to oversee all aspects of Toronto's housing portfolio, achieving historic wins in the pursuit of a more equitable, vibrant, and livable city. So glad to have you here, Anna. And certainly last but not least, Jennifer Quinn, Nieuport Aviation's Chief Strategy and Development Officer. Jennifer is a proven infrastructure executive with deep knowledge of infrastructure assets and business models. She joined Nieuport Aviation 2 years ago at a pivotal time when COVID travel restrictions were being lifted, and now helps accelerate the company's implementation of strategic initiatives and infrastructure projects. For anyone who isn't aware, Nieuport is the owner of the terminal at Billy Bishop Airport. So welcome, everyone. And before we get into the questions, let's put up some responses to the poll question introduced by Tim about how you got here today. So okay, this is a walkable and transit accessible destination, evidently. Over 60% of people, or just about exactly 60% of people walked 66, took the TTC or walked here, and some biked as well. Under 20% drove. So it's quite telling that this remains an accessible location, but there's still a lot more that we can do. So, you know, I wanted to open with some questions for each of you. You know, Pina, a major theme of this event is connectivity. And it's been mentioned today how several spots on the waterfront, though beautiful, aren't always the easiest to get to by transit. So can you tell us a bit about Waterfront Toronto's plans to connect places like the East Bayfront and the Portlands to the rest of the city and the region?
Sure. I think Waterfront Toronto has a few different things we're doing in terms of connecting the waterfront to the city. We're here talking about transit, and we saw that a lot of people arrived today either walking or by transit. So maybe I'll start by talking a little bit about the Waterfront East LRT plan. This is a plan we've been developing in collaboration with the city and TTC. It's council approved, and it has us introducing a new transit line that travels east along the waterfront on Queens Quay, out to Cherry Street, and also travels south from where the 504 ends today in the Distillery District, down Cherry Street and out into the Portlands and the future Villiers Island. The plan has a series of different large infrastructure components associated with it. There's extensive reconstruction of the loop that's currently in Union Station, where the LRT, the 509-510 streetcar disembarks at the subway. That needs to be rebuilt to put 4 platforms in there so that we can accommodate all the different lines going into Union Station. The tunnels need to be upgraded that take the current 509-510 down to Queens Quay. We need to make a new portal to the east. Surface works along Queens Quay, surface works along the extension of Queens Quay to Cherry, surface improvements down Cherry, and then there's already a new bridge that takes us over to the Portlands, but then we've got to build the track work out into Villiers Island. So it's quite a bit of work to do to get that line in place. In addition to that, though, we've been, for many years, investing in bicycle infrastructure on the waterfront. Before the Martin Goodman Trail was installed along Queens Quay, since the Martin Goodman Trail was installed along Queens Quay, we saw 850% increase in cycling usage on the waterfront, and that trail is one of the busiest trails in the city. In Queens Quay West, we saw that we're investing in making much larger pedestrian connections, making connections north-south to the city. And then lastly, we're on the water. So also thinking about how Lake Ontario can be an asset from a transportation perspective. In 2020, we completed a marine use strategy together with the City of Toronto, Ports Toronto, TRCA, in which we have identified a series of marine nodes, a potential future network that might use existing modes like water taxis, but may also introduce new modes for moving people, both from a recreation perspective, but also from a transportation perspective using the water.
That's great, thanks. And thanks, that's, I think, a good introduction so that we understand all that's happening here. Oops, just gonna make sure it's not echoing. Anna, obviously you were a major player on council when it came to getting important projects approved. It's especially true when it came to housing. So as an insider now working outside government, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges, but also the biggest opportunities we have here on the waterfront for getting transit and housing built?
First of all, thank you for putting the question that way, because I am still in transition, so
it
was a good way to put it. I think that, I always think of these issues as the big challenge is how the city responds to the fast-paced growth that we're having and that we need in an environment that is seeing unprecedented social behaviors that we're not really sure where it's going, with financial tools that are very, very limited, and inequalities that are growing in our city. So when you think about this problem so big, you think about what is happening in the waterfront, and many of these other issues has huge, huge opportunities. And I think that's what we have, the plans that we have at the waterfront are for our city are a huge opportunity. I also look at things like this. When we want to have a big project done in the city, is 2 things that need to be done. Identify the players that need to be at the table, and what do you see are the common grounds? Like, what is common to all of that? And if you look at the way that we have now, the 3 levels of government aligned in building infrastructure and funding infrastructure, tying it to housing, and the fact that they've already had huge investments in waterfront, $1.5 billion, if I'm not mistaken, in flood protection, in making sure that we build over the next 10 years 280,000 housing units in the city. What better location to have these projects done than the Waterfront Toronto? But for that, you need to build a community, and that transit is part of the community. The biggest thing as well is that the biggest landowner is the government and the waterfront. So when we're talking about building communities, if you see the projects that is happening in the West Don Lands, which Dream is a partner, or it happened in the Pan Am Village, where you have 30% of affordable housing in government land, those are projects that if you have the infrastructure created, and sooner rather than later in the waterfront, you build great communities, you build inclusive communities. So that's really the opportunity that we have in here. It's smart investment, is good investment, is equitable investment.
Well, thanks so much. I think you're absolutely right that there is a tremendous opportunity on the waterfront for housing, for the waterfront to play an enormous role in housing people that are coming to this region. Jennifer, so obviously you work for one of the major players, one of the major stakeholders on the waterfront. What kind of vision does the airport have for the longer term on the waterfront and for transportation and other infrastructure issues?
No, thanks for the question, and thanks for the opportunity to join the conversation. The airport's definitely a proud member of the waterfront community, though not yet a member of the BIA, Tim, so I know we'll have that conversation later. I think when we talk about the vision for the waterfront, we've heard about some of the ways in which that comes to life through investment in transit, investment in housing, but ultimately this is about economic prosperity for the waterfront, for the city, for the region, and I think the airport is a critical component to that. My company, Nieuport Aviation, invested in the passenger terminal building in 2015. We bought that because we saw Billy Bishop Airport as a critical transportation hub for the region. And I think we want to continue to invest and continue to unlock that. We serve 3 million passengers per year. We really are a connector and a mode of entry into the city. We contribute $2 billion in GDP annually. We are making significant investments for the community and within the community to build our social license to continue to operate. Tying that back to transportation, our partners at Ports Toronto electrified the ferry. We are bringing a fleet of electric shuttle buses this year, actually, to serve passengers. And all that being said, in terms of the airport's vision, we want to continue to contribute to the economy in that way, and we want to continue to grow responsibly. And I think I just want to touch on 3 things that are really going to enable that growth and that economic impact in support of the waterfront vision. The first is delivery of U.S. pre-clearance. So this has been a project that we've been talking about for years. We're working very closely with our government partners to realize that project. That's going to increase connectivity to the U.S. through the waterfront and through Toronto, downtown. That's going to contribute an additional $3 billion in GDP within a couple of years. It'll open up 10 new destinations that can be served from the airport. So all of that, again, on theme of transportation and connectivity, is critically important. The second item or enabler is really looking at securing the long-term future of the airport. So we've got an operating agreement that expires in 10 years. I think everyone in the room can appreciate that's not enough time to be thinking about long-term investment. We need to modernize. We need to renew that agreement now. And we know there's a lot of support to do that. And last but not least, again, kind of more in line with the theme of today on transportation, the airport has to be integrated when we think about transportation system planning. We boast often that 40% of our travelers access the airport. I loved actually that poll because 40% right now to the airport come via transit or biking or walking, and that's a great number, and certainly I think leaders in North America. But as we continue to grow and continue to invest, that percentage needs to be higher, and that's only going to be supported through integrated transit planning. And I love, Pina, what you were talking earlier about sort of the marine strategy, because I don't think it's sort of one mode of transportation. I think we need to think more broad and more innovatively than that. I think marine is an important aspect. We are on the waterfront. How we bring passengers, how we bring cargo and goods across the waterfront, including the airport, needs to be considered, as well as maybe other modes of transportation, aerial transit, some people call it gondolas, whatever you want to say. Those are being used around the world as part of a broader transportation system, and I'd love us to think about that as well.
Well, thank you so much. And we have a bunch of audience questions coming in. It's a hot topic, and there are lots of people here. One of the questions, and this is sort of the pointed question that I think it would be good to hear from all of you, given your experience in infrastructure and government. There are a lot of transit projects. We heard from Minister Mulroney. There are a lot of transit projects that are under construction right now and being funded right now, tens of billions of dollars worth. The Waterfront LRT is in the queue, but it's not funded yet. So, what are the opportunities to get that funded? Are there different kinds of opportunities to get it funded, different ways, creative ways? Or is there a case to be made that this is an essential project to develop a key housing area for the region?
I would say that this is a perfect project to be appealed to the federal government for their infrastructure funding. It ties very much so with the work that the mayor has asked to add density, and it ties with the direction that the federal government has been saying that they want to tie infrastructure to housing delivery. So I think it would be a good project to have being delivered that way as well. I mean, we all know the financial situation of the City of Toronto. I think it's been in the news. It's budget time, so it comes at every budget until it gets solved. Every budget, we're going to hear the same thing over and over again, and the same reports coming forward over and over again. But I think that that this is definitely a project that I think when you score all the things that can come out of it, and what it adds, what it could add to all the governments in terms of the uplift in the land value. I mean, it is acres that governments own around here. The affordable housing that you can create, and other projects. I mean, I would say, for example, some of the most beautiful public spaces that we've had done in our city have been in the waterfront, have been some of the parks that have been done there. So there's good public good that can come from all that land uplift. And we know that transit will bring even more of it. So it's just really good, smart investment. And if you start thinking about it that way and doing the math that way, I think this project would score a lot higher than it has been scoring as well. Now, I'm also going to say this because as a former politician, one of the problems is that there's nobody, or now there's starting to be a few residents, but you haven't had anybody knocking at politicians' doors saying you need to build transit here.
We're here now.
But we're here now, and I think it is our responsibility to start saying that. And so, as politicians, when there's finite resources, you always tend to say, okay, what are my constituents? What are the constituents saying? But I think it's time, given the finite resources, that we start making the argument and being very, very facts-oriented and math-oriented, and what really this could bring to the city in terms of all the things, the boxes that could be checked.
Well, maybe I can jump in
Yeah.
and just give an update in terms of where we're at in the process for the Waterfront East LRT. We have been funded to complete the preliminary design and engineering work. That's a very important stage gate in the process of getting funding for a project of this scale. That work is expected to be completed and taken to council in Q2 of 2023. So it's a few months away that we will have completed 30% design for the entire first phase of the project, together with TTC and the city, as well as the business case and the implementation strategy associated with the project.
So, well, that's very helpful. One of the other questions was, we have, whenever you're thinking about a transportation problem, you have to think about connecting A to B. And we can think about the waterfront as a destination for people, but we also have to think about their origins. Can you talk a little bit about where people are coming from to the waterfront and how transportation solutions can address travel times and reasonable accessibility for the waterfront as an amenity for the entire region?
Maybe I can start with that too. I mean, we know from having looked at data that people are coming from across the entire region. They're even coming, internationally to visit our waterfront. It's absolutely an amazing place to live, and as Tim mentioned, more and more people are moving here, both to live and to work. But it is also a regional attraction. We're building a waterfront for the entire city, for our province, and for our country. So we do see visitors come from far and away, and they're coming via TTC, but they're also coming via the GO network to get to the waterfront. We know the Toronto Island alone attracts 1.5 million ferry rides over to the island. They're definitely not all coming from 2 blocks surrounding it.
Maybe if I can jump in here. I mean, I think in terms of, we know the visitor economy is important, and I think the airport plays a key role in supporting, incoming visitors from the US, and it ties back to why pre-clearance is so important. But, I think that once those passengers and people arrive from the US, they also then need to know how to go on from the airport, and having that access to transit, I think, is important to be able to navigate all the different destinations that are at the waterfront.
Absolutely. You mentioned GO. Obviously, we heard a lot about GO expansion earlier today, which may have prompted this question. But we have this rail corridor. What direction am I pointing? We have this rail corridor, really, that runs right along the waterfront, just a few blocks north of Queens Quay. What are the opportunities for using GO to enhance access to the waterfront?
Well, I would say, in a way, it's already happening. Union Station is a big spoke in terms of how people are getting here. We saw it in the survey. I think a bigger percentage walked from Union than actually took, the TTC right to the door, and it's so convenient to get here from Union Station. But as the network continues to grow, the Waterfront East LRT is intended to tee into the East Harbor Station to the east as well, so yet another way of connecting the system, the waterfront up into the broader network. The Waterfront East LRT is a network solution. It isn't a brand new line just for the waterfront. It's all about tying the waterfront up into the bigger system that already exists and building off of it.
I think an interesting piece of work that over the next few months would be good to have, given that the city is looking at extra density even more than the precinct plan, is actually see how that infrastructure that we have in the plans between the Ontario line, the East Harbor, the other stations that we have on the go, and the LRT, how are they going to serve? Are they still going to serve the increased density the same way? Do we need to do anything else? Because we know that connectivity between these different modes is essential, right, for the success and for people to create the habit of having reliable transit. So I think it'd be a well worth exercise that I think everybody in the waterfront would be willing to entertain, just to make sure that we're all heading in the same direction. I think it is important to, again, bring these two together. If you're increasing the density, let's make sure that what we have, we take the best, we make the best use out of it.
Yep, absolutely. So, we had a question as well about, we talk about transit, which is of course very important. What role does active transportation, cycling, et cetera, play in access to the waterfront? You mentioned obviously there's a lot of new bike infrastructure, but is there more coming, and what role can cycling? And I think we had 5% of people cycled here today, so, and maybe that number will grow.
But I think in 2015, we completed the continuous stretch of the Martin Goodman Trail between Stadium Road and Parliament Street. And it's pretty amazing to think that before that, we had on-street cycling in mixed traffic down on the waterfront. That was a huge accomplishment, I think, and has been, it's become a really great way to commute to the waterfront. We saw, as I said, within 1 year after opening it, 850% increase from before we started construction, which is huge. Yeah. In terms of the future, we need to connect that into the system as well. So making some of the north-south connections that are critical from a cycling perspective, upgrading the east, which is only built as an interim Martin Goodman Trail right now, everything east of Bay Street. When we rebuild Queen's Quay as part of the Waterfront East project, we would bring a permanent cycling infrastructure that's wider and can accommodate the demand that we're seeing down here on the waterfront.
One of the examples, and I think this is maybe relevant for all of you, we had a question about what lessons can we draw, what examples are we drawing from other major cities with large waterfronts. Tokyo was cited specifically, but of course there are many others that are undertaking these kinds of large waterfront developments. What can we learn from these places, and what have we learned?
I could jump in just a little bit and talk to some work we ourselves did. A few years ago, we completed an assessment of the 10 best waterfronts in the world and really tried to understand what are the attributes of great waterfronts. How do we get ourselves on the top 10 waterfronts in the world list? And there are some really, obvious trends if you start to look at cities side by side that are great waterfronts. Things like great architecture, connectivity, bridges, Sydney Opera Houses. And I don't know that we can all have a Sydney Opera House, but that's certainly you start to see cultural institutions as an important aspect of that. And I think, as we take on new projects on the waterfront, we need to assess them against those attributes of great waterfronts. And so committing to things like a cultural institution on the eastern end of the waterfront as part of the Quayside revitalization, having a design review panel that reviews every project that's being built, whether it's a park, a road, or a new building on the waterfront. These are all sort of tactics in trying to create a great waterfront.
If I could say it, a little bit of a commercial, but I think the proposal, the work that Dream and Great Gulf is doing with Waterfront, I think is a perfect example because it touches on all these things that Pina talked about, right? From net zero to affordable housing to great design to great public spaces, the amount of work that the team is spending in making sure that the public realm is really accessible, is open to, urban farming, to cultural centers, you name it. We're working on all these things, and I think that's what is going to make a great community and a great waterfront.
Yeah, maybe just to add, I think connectivity is obviously critical to that and being part of the community that you live in. And for us, that's really important. And we would look to examples like London City and how they've been able to invest in their community, partner with their community, increase connectivity, and how much they've been able to contribute back as a result. So.
And another question is, obviously one of the most valuable, you mentioned 1.5 million people. One of the great assets we have on our waterfront is the island. But it can be challenging, both financially and in some ways, at some times of the year, the ferries can be pretty overcrowded. So, what kind of things can we do to help improve access to the islands so that they can, feel like an integrated part of the waterfront?
Yeah, you'd be better positioned to speak about the marine strategy, but I think that is a critical component to that. Because if I think even from an airport perspective, there's the ferry, there's the tunnel to access the airport, all of the goods, shipping of things that we need for our concessionaires in the airport all come through the same place that our passengers do, and that creates congestion very quickly. So I'd love to see, another access point. It can still be, on a ferry, it would need to be to transport trucks, et cetera, but it doesn't have to come from the same point of entry. So I think that's a critical component.
I think the city's already doing a lot to make it easier to get to the island with online ticketing, investing in new ferries over the coming years, improving the way that you access the ferry terminal. That's working with the system we already have. But then layering into that, how can we build other systems that maybe move along the waterfront in a more granular way, like water taxis that are obviously an emerging industry in our harbor, or marine shuttles, or various other technologies that may not be here yet.
Any other thoughts? Otherwise, we can, not to necessarily look backwards, but obviously, if you think back to 2020 and before that, when we were all not doing Zoom calls and at events much like this, but we didn't have this beautiful space. There was a lot of talk about the Sidewalk Labs project at Quayside. Now, we're talking about reinvigorating the waterfront's development. So what are some of the lessons that we can draw from that? And what have we learned? And have we moved on entirely from those perceptions that has created?
Well, maybe I'll start, and then I can turn it to Anna to talk about what's the future of that site. The Quayside site, the 12-acre site on the eastern waterfront that Waterfront Toronto was formerly partnered with Sidewalk Labs on. Waterfront Toronto set some very ambitious goals for that site. It's 5 blocks of our waterfront, and we want to use it to demonstrate how we can create a dynamic, inclusive, sustainable, resilient community. And so I think what we have recently done, we challenged our development community. We've brought on a new development partner for that site, Quayside Impact Limited Partnership, which is a partnership of Dream and Great Gulf. And they've answered. They're bringing in that development a 3.5-acre publicly accessible public space right through the center of those development blocks. They're bringing carbon neutral development with tall wood building on Queen's Quay, which is set to be the largest of its type, right across the street here. They're bringing, what else? Design excellence, bringing some of the best architects in the world forward as part of their proposal. And the list just goes on. Anna, if you want to pick up from here.
Timber construction, affordable housing.
800 plus units of affordable housing as part of that development. We're really, we're creating complete communities. And I think the conversation we should be having is about the future of that site.
Absolutely. Yes, no, that makes sense. And I think that we are coming to the end of our time. So, I think that this was a really fantastic discussion. It was wonderful for you to all come up here and join us, and we really appreciate it at the board. We are here on the waterfront. You know, this is our space. Obviously, it's been built to last. So we hope that this will be home to the board for a good long time. And as stakeholders of the waterfront, we're thrilled that all three of you are working to build a better waterfront for all of us. So thank you so much. And if we can give them a round of applause. Thank you.